the 2001 election, in the 2006 election, in the 2011 election, in the 2021 election, and in the demonstrations that have ensued over the last so many years. And no one is held to account. And the most we can do is suppress statements from the embassy. Simply a microcosm of that problem. The crisis we face is political, and that crisis can only be resolved by us building consensus around basically having opening a new chapter and a fresh page, and say, like the apartheid system collapsed, let it collapse, and then we can start to have a new constitution, or like the fall of Idi Amin, and say, now that Idi Amin is out, can we attempt to open a new chapter? Or once, look at Kenya after Daniel Arap Moi. The Raila Odingas, when they were resisting him, did not approach Arap Moi's torture of Kenyans as a moral question. They approached it as part of a political crisis that needed to first be fixed. And only until that crisis was fixed was Kenya able to open the new path that they're on now. Of course, not perfect. They still have their own challenges, but I think that Kenya is not the same after the fall of Arap Moi. South Africa, in many ways, still has many economic questions to be resolved, but it is not the same as it was under apartheid. Uganda was not the as long as Museveni still holds power.
An invite. Hopefully, he can be able to accept and be able to speak to us. I've also sent conversation. And as we can we do as a country to put an end to torture?
Victims of torture in Uganda, particularly in the country. To the lower political classes, many of them posted on Facebook, and I was arrested twice by Yoweri Museveni's military and the FFU unit. I was abducted the first time. I want to thank Councillor Nicholas Opio for fronting an appeal to the UN Working Group against arbitrary detention. So we have an appeal at the UN level, right, through Council Nicholas Opio. I want to thank Aaron Kiza because he was part of my legal team that initially appealed to the Uganda Human Rights Commission prior to the death of the previous director or commissioner, whatever his title was. Uganda Human Rights Commission, actually in my case of torture when I was beaten, when I was pregnant and I lost a baby in prison, they sent a mission to Luzira Women Prison. Unfortunately, because of the systemic culture of torture that has been institutionalized in our institutions, the judiciary, the penitentiary services, the prison services, Uganda Human Rights Commission's staff who are investigating my case were denied, first of all, access to my medical records in prison. Secondly, they were denied access to prisoners who were willing to give evidence about my beating, my torture, helping me to wash the blood off my clothes, helping me to dispose of the fetus that was between my legs because I had a miscarriage. And so if we're thinking about gathering evidence, we need the victims' narratives when it is still early, because those institutions that are mandated by our constitution to take care of violence and torture by the state, a human rights violation, are no longer able to because they've been captured by dictator Museveni. I'm sorry, I get emotional when I talk about this. So Uganda Human Rights Commission, UN Working Group against arbitrary detention, the different layers to which we could appeal against torture, even when there's political will to act on behalf of victims of torture and violence, many times are failed. It is unfortunate that Kakwenza is not here to share his story. However, every scar on Kakwenza's body, every invisible scar from trauma in Kakwenza's mind, because we don't see the sort of wounding that happens when a person is even just told to dance as a form of torture. We don't see the insomnia, the anxiety. When I left prison, I was collapsing every time. I was collapsing relationships, into our employment, into our jobs, even into our very own security after they've beaten us up. In my case, twice, first at Mengo Hospital, affected with toxins, right? Because the medical profession, Ivan Okuda called for the elite, a lot of the evidence of torture. We've heard this from people all over. Tell you that in my own case, medical, military people are deployed contrary to the Hippocratic oath that they swear to disappear evidence, okay? To disappear the physical evidence of torture, which is what we need to make a case in court. In my case, after my miscarriage, we had an appeal to the grade 1 magistrate who was trying my case. And she asked for evidence. Where is the evidence that this woman suffered Kakwenza has talked of being injected with substances. Others, such as Bobby Wine, to do in building this elite consensus is to critique and criticize and condemn the medical profession, which is disappearing evidence. Part of the other thing I want to talk about is the silencing of victims. Media participation. However, I want to also highlight the constant condemnation of those of us who have experienced torture at the hands of the state. Stop silencing us. Perhaps I'm preaching to the converted here, but I want to encourage that even when we are in our alternative spaces at the club, with the men, with the, chilling with the big boys, doing our feminist thing, that we encourage others in our immediate circles to allow victims to speak. Because in my case, it was close friends and family who say to me, Stella, shut up. You are endangering us. It is not just about you, Stella, as an individual who was tortured, who doesn't know your story. Shut up. You are making our life difficult. And so for the safety of my friends and family, sometimes even for the safety of the professionals who are working with me, I had to silence my pain. However, by doing that, the evidence, the story is disappeared. It's kept under the table. Solomon, tell me when I overshoot my time, because I could go on and on and on. Having said that, I think what is important is to use this moment as a trigger to build a pushback. We must not allow ourselves to be silenced or intimidated. The state is mandated constitutionally to protect and give us security. When they fail miserably, it is the duty of citizens to build our own security. And part of building our own security is going to start by allowing us to resist. Somebody talked about the closing out of space. Like, yes. Common man. I want to on this burden. Many times the abductors come about these men are outside my door, they are breaking my door. If he hadn't recorded his conversation with Aaron, if those of us who were expecting him in the time around Christmas to be with us, to engage with us, if we were not following up with his story, perhaps we wouldn't have known. But what if his neighbors, the people in the flats around his small house, had also participated in raising the consciousness of the masses? And so I think that what I want to offer is to build on this momentum that has been created by Kakwenza's case, to say it is time to resist. To resist the intimidation. The beatings that are physical are, one, to silence the victim, two, to silence dissidents and silence dissent, but three, that we yield. And I think what I'm calling all of us to do is to say no. Our voice will not be taken away from us. Our ability, however small, to take action, begin teaching around the importance of fighting back is important. So I want to thank you so much, because Maybe one last thing, because I've spoken 6 points. One last thing I want to say is we cannot shut out allies, whether they are East African, African, or from the global world. That part of the pressure that we are going to be our own saviors. We're going to liberate Uganda ourselves, those of us who are residents, citizens, national, or people with vested interest in Uganda. We are the ones to liberate ourselves from these torturers. However, we need allies to build solidarity and take action on our behalf and create an arm of pressure on the government that exposes and shares and amplifies the issues we are raising. We cannot say that it's not that a mere statement from an embassy is not good enough. We cannot denigrate an honorary membership from PEN, Germany's Writers in Prison program. We cannot say it is not good enough for foreigners in Kenya, for example, to voice and have a hashtag saying Free Kakwenza or whatever, because the people outside the borders are perhaps more able to take on some of the amplification and replication of the messages we want to take out. And so I think for me that while much more can be done by our ambassadors and the embassies and the donors and all of that, the little that they're doing must be appreciated. And lastly, we must call out these foreign funders of torture. The people who are arming Uganda with armaments must be called out for their duplicity and hypocrisy, because bilateral relations notwithstanding, I think that we know particular countries in the EU and Northern America that are funding torture in Uganda, and they must be called out. The duplicity must be called out. They cannot be demanding for human rights with the left hand and beating or arming our beaters with the chiboko to beat us. So I think I have tabled a number of issues, and I want to thank you very much. Have a good engagement. I hope it doesn't stop at just I hope it goes to much more than just this, and that there will be some citizen action involving both the elite and the masses. Thank you very much.
Dr. Stella Nyanzi, thank you. If you could just stay with us. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you very much. A special thank you to the Uganda People's Defense Forces, which is also in this call. The official Twitter handle of the Uganda People's Defense Forces is also listening in closely in the different voices that are coming from different Ugandans against torture. The UPDF, maybe we could get officials from there, as well as the UPDF spokesman Ofono Pondo, official account is closely listening in. The UPDF's account is closely listening in. Can we hear you speak up on these issues? Well, it's time for you to speak back or to talk back. Close with action points from this space, and we see how we can actually where do we go from here as a citizen. We have 780 on the call. This is quite a big audience for us to voice out our concerns and to build a critical mass and demand for end to torture in Uganda in all our different spaces, whether we're in government offices, whether we are in the army, whether we're in the police force, whether we are in CMI or whatever, or civil society, or all of us as Ugandans. It's time for us to raise up and stand up and say no to torture. I have personally put my foot down, and I am going to continue to speak up against torture, because we all are humans. We all bleed red when we are injured. because we are all, when we are beaten, we feel pain. When they use pliers and electricity on us, we all feel pain. Today you may decide to be quiet. Tomorrow it will be you in that space. And because you did not speak up against torture, you will be held as well accountable, and no one will speak up for you. It's your time to speak back. I'll give you an opportunity to say a word or two in a minute or two, and then we can come back and wrap it up. A special thank you to Alan Darren Cheyune. Alan Darren Cheyune is a journalist with the BBC as well as with the Daily Monitor. He's a sports commentator and also a journalist covering different spheres. Thank you so much for co-hosting this space, Alan. We appreciate you very much. All right, a couple of hands are up. I would love to give an opportunity to Jackie Oloya. After Jackie, then I will give an opportunity to Andrew Karamaji. I will also give an opportunity to Mr. Wangadi, as well as Ramsdale Semuju, for you to say a word or two. If you've been given an opportunity, you can just spend a minute or two to put your message across. I'll start with Jackie Oloya. Jackie?
Thank you very much, Solomon, and thanks a lot for bringing us on this space. And at the same time, I would like to thank everyone who has sacrificed to tune into this space. I think it affects everyone. I'm talking from a perspective of a child hailing from northern Uganda and having grown up at the time of the war, and having witnessed, even among my siblings, who went through torture in the hands of the military in Uganda. And whenever I see torture being meted on the different people in Uganda, it brings back memories, sad memories of my childhood. Having seen my elder brothers who were rounded up, and I think many of you know the word Kandoya. And Kandoya is a famous and very a word that is not loved in northern Uganda, actually in particular where I hail from, because most of our brothers, at that time I was a little girl, and my brothers, one of them up to today has been disabled as a result of Kandoya. So when we talk about torture, torture in Uganda did not start today or yesterday, and did not start just with the few we have listened to. It has been growing. The magnitude has grown. But my point here, Uganda is our home. Uganda is for all of us. We all want to live home in harmony and happily. So, as we see this torture magnifies and grows, I think the best you've done is to open this space. I don't want to say so much today, but I think the best is from a medical perspective, when you want to solve a problem, is you have to diagnose it. I think talking about this, we are giving diagnosis to this problem that is maiming most of our loved ones, and some have lost even their lives, and some are undergoing torture as we speak on this space today. For those outside the country, it is always a nightmare. We are in fear. Even as I speak now, I don't know when I come, because I am trying to blame this terrible act being meted on my fellow citizens. And always the culture is that we shouldn't speak about it. So way forward is, I would like to urge all Ugandans to speak out and to record, like Council Pio said. all the torture and injustices being meted on citizens, so that we have an account, so that someday someone can also testify that I was tortured. And here are the evidence. I also call upon our security personnel in Uganda that we all want to love you and your families, but it is hard to love someone who tortures you. As Ugandans, on tales and cases of torture and other injustices, because we want a Uganda that all of us can live in harmony and peace in this century and time. Thank you very much, Solomon. Thanks a lot.
Jackie, your lawyer, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And you've said something, that those in the security forces are our fathers, they're our brothers, they're our uncles, they're our mothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. And sometimes when we, like Council Nicholas Opio said, if we generalize, then we blanket them amidst the culprits who torture people. And so, for example, I know that there's so many men and women in the UPDF that are against torture. So many men and women in the Uganda police who are against torture. And I think it's time for us to isolate those people who commit these atrocities individually, instead of just having a blanket statement of, the security forces, But thank you very much. Let me bring in Andrew Karamaji. Andrew.
Thank you, Solomon. We should impress upon ourselves, if we haven't already gotten it, that there is no humane way to rule people against their will. If you consider incidents that have happened through the lifetime of the ruling junta, Mukura, Buchura massacres, the war in the north, Kayunga, Kasese, November 18 and 19, all these incidents form a pattern. And so my conclusion or take on this question is that we have two choices. Either we accept this kind of misrule and all the methods required for its enforcement, or we reject it in its totality. We cannot, on the one hand, pick a mioga and say this works and then protest against the theft of public funds. We cannot endorse the joke called the parish model, which, if you look in the budget, has no money, and then condemn high taxes. It is these kinds of prevarications that keep us held down. I believe that we should reject not merely certain specific practices, but the greater aim for which these are essential. As my brother Ivan Okuda observed, and correctly so, torture is a core component of the ruling establishment that we have. The two cannot be separated. They are peas in a pod. And so for me, to protest in the name of morality against excesses or abuses does not quite cover it. The NRA is an all-pervasive system, as the incidents I mentioned at the beginning show. And my second and final point is that every other day we hear people talking about how one day this will come to an end. Unfortunately, whether you consider contemporary or recent or even medieval history, tomorrow never comes. We should throw out the notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure a problem like this. Oppressive systems can actually live on for years and centuries if nothing is done about it. So, my fellow Ugandans, just like our brothers and sisters in other countries on the continent have done, I think it's time we realize, one, that the current establishment has lost legitimacy, and we should organize and rise up in whatever way we can. Those who can sing should sing, those who can speak should speak, writers and all that should do whatever they can with the singular and united objective of bringing Museveni's family rule to an end. Spaces, articles in the papers, documentaries, and other court cases are important, but in a situation where, yes, Solomon.
Andrew, I hope you can wrap it up, Andrew, because I can see so many hands. Yeah.
Yes, for me, spaces, articles in the papers, documentaries, and all these other things are important. But in a situation where we have a judiciary and parliament that are in bed with the dictatorship, we have to go the full 9 yards and rid ourselves of this illegitimate and murderous regime. Thank you, Solomon.
All right, Andrew. I would love to say that the views expressed on this space are for people. Otherwise, I'm going to be charged with offensive communication as well. But yeah.
And Solomon, in law, that disclaimer does not save you. Just saying.
Duncan Abigava. Duncan Abigava, thank you so much for joining us. Is the Deputy Director GCIC, and that is under the State House. Duncan, you're welcome to give your views on torture. I would also love to add that these views are for the people, and we're just providing these spaces. But specifically, the conversation today is on torture. Not really rising up against government or what, but it's so much on torture. Duncan Abigaba, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Solomon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for convening us. I think you've had the biggest audience we've had on any Ugandan spaces. So it tells you how important this particular subject of torture is. And for starters, we are all candidates. Yeah, so first of all, you had sent me a request to speak earlier, but I had left that honor to my senior, Mr. Ofono Pondo, the government spokesperson who had appeared online, and I think he has left the spaces unceremoniously. So I'm not here to give a government position. I can't fit in those shoes, but I can make a personal comment, also maybe what government is trying to do. The bottom line is that torture is both illegal and immoral. And the president of Uganda has now on 2 occasions, he spoke in 2017, a security address and condemned the torture. He spoke again recently and condemned the torture. The president has been very categorical, and he has said that you cannot extract, you cannot extract relevant evidence from a suspect through coercion and use of all these barbaric methods. The president has been very categorical on that. And then secondly, we have so many provisions in our laws that really bar torture. The Bill of Rights in the Constitution, Chapter 4, Article 24. We have the Prevention of Torture Act of 2012. Then there is the Human Rights Act. All these ones really, reinforce each other as far as fighting torture is concerned. And we must condemn it, all of us. Good enough, there are voices in government that are standing up to this. I've been reading the New Vision today, and they say the IGP has ordered the closure of the Special Investigations Division, Chileka, where Council Pio has been, and others. It has come out prominently as one of the places where these inhumane acts happen. So that's a step taken in the right direction, closure of SID Chileka. Yeah, so government is taking some steps, albeit slowly, to manage this situation. Yeah, so I want to pose a question also to our friends, Council Pio, Council Okuda, and other activists. Sarah Birete, goodbye, you're here. The Human Rights Act says that any public officer who commits these acts of torture shall be held personally liable, prosecuted, and sanctioned. Yes, we have dwelled so much on these problems, the victims, parading them in the media and whatever. I do not want to downplay anything here. However, my question is, you've been some of the people that have been in these facilities. Take an example like Chireka, where Council Pio was. You can identify the commander of the facility, and you have the Human Rights Act empowering you to pursue private prosecution of this commander of the facility where you were tortured. How come we are not seeing anybody being prosecuted by the activists? I think this is one of the directions that we should take. Activists, you're empowered by the Human Rights Act to prosecute some of these people. Let's also start taking that direction. Solomon, I think that's what I wanted to say. I thank you for the opportunity.
Duncan Abigaba, thank you very much. While you're saying that, it was interesting that human rights activists should take those commanders to court, and I can see Councillor Nicholas Opio is raising his hands. I think he's going to answer that. The question though would be, why isn't the Attorney General doing that? You see, why isn't the Attorney General of Uganda going to court and taking those people to court for torturing people? Councillor Nicholas Opio, this question was posed to you as well. You can come in.
Well, thank you. I didn't want to speak. I have had to jump out of my engagement to answer to Duncan because he's a person of interest. He's very interesting character. Let me disabuse him of short memory. When General Kale Kaihura endorsed and publicly supported the torture of Kizza Besigye and his supporters, we went to court. We filed a case. Andrew Karamaji is here, he will confirm that. We filed a case against General Kale Kaihura and 9 other police officers. We almost lost our lives. Goons hired by people in police who were deployed in the courthouse to lynch the lawyers. All of you remember what Chitata and Border 2012 did when we attempted to do that. So it's not for lack of trying. I have filed several cases of individual liabilities against individuals. And guess who swears affidavit in support of those individuals? The director of legal affairs in police. They're the ones who have the evidence. They're the ones who destroy the evidence and come to court to block any such. I have several judgments against individual officers. None of them is respected. And so I think that people like Duncan could do a lot better getting to grips with what people are doing to hold individuals to account. But secondly, and more importantly, the Attorney General can go to court to prosecute Mabirizi for contempt of court, but sit idly when officers at CMI torture Kakwenza. Really, the responsibility is in the hands of the duty bearer, to whom we pay taxes, to whom we sign a social contract, and we cannot sweep away that responsibility and saying, how about you activists? In fact, we don't have a duty. The state has a duty to hold these individuals to account. Duncan, you may not know this, but I wrote the Prohibition and Prevention of Torture Act in 2005, led the campaign for its enactment. I think what you are referring to as the Human Rights Act, I think you meant the Human Rights Enforcement Act. A lot of these things are things we have done, given you the tools to be able to do these things as a state. And you have done absolutely nothing. The second thing is this, and lastly, and I have to run, is to say this, that the result of this kind of work, you see, people like General Kale Kaihura are now in places that we all know. People like Barroza is hiding in Canada, was a personal assistant to the IGP. People like this police officer who is supposed to be hiding in South Africa, the short man who used to be at CPS. Eventually, these things catch up with you. Duncan will not be the deputy spokesperson of that place on Acacia Avenue forever. He will move on. These things will follow you. And I think that it is up to us to stand up to be counted. Today, you might go after me because you think. And I'll tell you just the last story, just to end it here. The Chireka facility is like Nalufenya. Closing it doesn't solve the problem. Didn't we close VCCU? Didn't we close RRU? It hasn't solved the problem. So these cosmetic things of closing buildings does not solve the problem. When I went to Chireka to help somebody who had been detained, I think his name was Kawoya, that facility had a deputy commandant called Okecho from Tororo. Okecho's own brother had been abducted by CMI from Tororo, was being detained at SIU Chireka across the road from his office. He couldn't see his own brother and asked me to help him get his brother out. This is the deputy commandant of the Special Investigations Unit. So you can see the extent of the problem. Bona Duncan, we need to get you out of your bubble so that you realize the plight of so many Ugandans who have suffered in the hands of people we know. I have put the names of individuals who are involved in these actions in public. Some of them, you know them. I see sometimes you say, we condemn torture. People who torture people should go to hell. When you have the ability to send them to prison and you don't, those statements mean nothing. We've got to ask of people who we pay as taxpayers, who we give a duty to do their job. We must ask Kasinje to stop tweeting, but go and make sure that these people are arrested. We cannot thank him for tweeting. We must ask him to do the duty for which he is recruited, paid by taxpayers to do. We cannot ask people in government, people in government, Pondo condemns torture. You have a duty, you have a role. Do it. Thank you, Solomon.
Council, thank you. Duncan, do you want to react to what Council Nicholas has said?
Yeah, thank you, Solomon, and thank you, Council Nicholas, for those insights. Like I have said, if I were in Opondo's shoes, maybe I would have been in position to perhaps make more commitments than I can do right now in my position. We agree with the Council Nicholas on some things. We disagree on some things. But the bottom line is that torture is illegal, it is inhumane, and it is immoral. We should all condemn it. Of His Excellency the President, that torture has no praise. Torture has no praise, and it's the Attorney General says it. Evidence obtained through torture is inadmissible in court. So whoever is doing this, they are actually wasting time. But just say something about the Attorney General not prosecuting these people, and the Council Nicholas would agree with me on this. I think the Attorney General also does not know where some of these people are. Because if Council Pio is picked from Kamocha at the market they are eating food and is taken somewhere, it could be anywhere. It's very hard for the Attorney General to know that so and so picked Council Pio. But it is easy for Council Pio to say, I was taken to this facility and the commandant was so and so, and I'm taking them to court for these acts. That's what I think. So it's very hard for the Attorney General to trace everybody and all these issues that are happening. Yeah.
Duncan, can I just, if you can stay with us, let's give an example of Kakwenza's case. He has come out publicly and he says he was in a state house, SFC facility, publicly. So we clearly know from what he's saying, he actually was in the hands of the Special Forces Command. Can't then the Attorney General, if the Attorney General seeks to take on the case, or indeed the police to take on the case of this torture, we know that the Attorney General can use all the state machinery there is to actually get to collect as much evidence as he can to carry out a prosecution. So I think, in my view, you cannot absolutely say that the Attorney General doesn't know. We have seen people who have been given bail before the courts of law who are coming out literally not able to walk, and they are rearrested again and taken elsewhere to unknown locations. And then the army comes out and says, it's us who have them. Even when they're being given bail, but even when they're limping, they can barely walk. The Attorney General indeed has all the state machinery. If there is political will to actually take on, the people who are doing this, Duncan.
Solomon, from central Uganda of to the hyenas or leopard. So in this case, I would say maybe
fairly more intellectual discussion than torture is not a weakness of the late 80s, where they faced resistance in the north. Is the strongest link in the chain. And his cabal have had and Attorney General, and why don't you prosecute, and why don't you do private prosecution? Never mind the fact that the DPP under the law has power to take over your private prosecution, and what they do with your case after that is none of your business. It's between them and the court. Increasingly more unpopular. So violence. What would you expect of the courts of law under become part of the script? And therefore, it takes me back to my earlier argument that what we have is a political crisis. What Misolaro Tunu has ably called the comprehensive brokenness of a nation. And last, did not imagine that preaching good manners and morality to Idi Amin was enough. They did not imagine that the American embassy or the British High Commission issuing statements was enough. They problematized the Idi Amin question as a political crisis that had to be solved politically, and that in many ways explains the change that happened then. And partly you can extrapolate that conversation to Kenya under Arap Moi. You can extrapolate that conversation to the hallmark of the ANC struggle. It was built on the idea that you need to overhaul the entire system and have a chance. And to do what do you expect of a DPP, looking at career growth and progress? To do what do you expect of us? Some of them might be enablers, on violence. From there, what he's doing, I think it's those that are opposed to him that do not know what they're doing. Because first, there is a problem of misdiagnosis. I saw Jackie, lawyer, the doctor. I'm sure she has an idea about diagnosis. So there is misdiagnosis of what the problem is, and then we have wrong prescription. We lose it when we start to look at this cancer as simply one of tissue A or tissue B. We must confront the political crisis that we face of our generation, of our time. And if we don't confront that political crisis, in Kenya, you must have a comprehensive.
Speaking tough, Ivan, thank you very much for your guidance and your thought process. Patrick Kanyomozi, can I come to you after I've brought in Kanare Mugume and what your experience was while you were still in the house? I want to say a special thank you to the national. I really appreciate everyone who is on the call today for being part of this space. Thank you for taking off time to.
Thanks to everyone who was tuning into the space. I think it is, for the media side, it's important that we continue to document and publish, what is happening in the country, because you see, one day it would be Kakwenza or even you, Serwanja, awareness. We cannot stop raising awareness. Maybe as Duncan came to speak, maybe he would correct what he tweeted a few days. That happens, but also continue to press government